I am here on behalf of Booksmith. Thank you for coming. We've been an independent bookstore here in the Haight for 47 years. We have been trying to make amazing events like this one happen for that whole time, so they wouldn't be half as good if you guys didn't come, so thank you. Applause to you guys for coming out. So let's talk about the Terraformers. Woo! Has anybody here had a chance to read it yet? I know it's not officially out until... Okay, good. Then you have a fun ride in store for you guys, because I'm about a third of the way through myself, and I'm really enjoying it, and I think you guys will too. So, the Terraformers is set on this planet that is being terraformed and developed by real estate agents. And on that planet, they have been developing their environment over thousands of years. And part of the people who do that are the environmental rescue team. And that's what the story focuses on. And, you know, real estate guys are always the bad guys in Scooby-Doo episodes for a reason. I won't say more than that. But I just want to introduce our authors today. We'll be having today Robin Sloan. Their first novel, Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore, was a New York Times bestseller, translated into more than 20 languages. His latest novel, Sourdough, was published in 2017. With his partner, Catherine Tomajan, Robin produces California extra virgin olive oil under the label Fat Gold. And Annalee Newitz is an American journalist editor with an author of fiction and nonfiction. They are a recipient of a Knight Science Journalism Fellowship from MIT and have written for Popular Science, The New Yorker, and The Washington Post. They founded the science fiction website IO9 and served as editor-in-chief from 2008 to 2015, and then became editor-in-chief at Gizmodo and tech culture editors at Ars Technica. Their book, Scatter, Adapt, and Remember, How Humans Will Survive a Mass Extinction, was nominated for the LA Times Book Prize in Science. Their first novel, Autonomous, won a Lambda Award, and their latest book is Four Lost Cities, a nonfiction book that you'll see ties in a little bit with this fictional one. So with that, I'd like everybody to give a round of applause for our authors and give them your ears, eyes, and attention.
Oh boy, what a warm welcome. This is great. Okay, so I'm just going to set the stage here for a second so you know what to expect. This is an auspicious event because here we are in real physical space, stretching out, taking up space, surrounded by all these books, celebrating a book, a novel, Annalee's latest, that luxuriates in time and space and is sort of vast and capacious and like possibly every noun is represented somewhere on its pages. And we're going to talk more. We're going to talk more about that, but I just think there's this wonderful spirit of sort of like, yes, let's stretch out and like just take up space and think a lot together. I have lots of my own questions based on my reading of it, and I'm going to ask those to Annalee. I'm going to follow that up with a little lightning round of super fast rapid fire questions, at which point I will give you an opportunity. I know many folks here haven't read this book yet, but if you want to ask questions about Annalee's other work or kind of things to help prepare you for your read, we'll have time for that at the end. To start, though, and to give you a taste of this richness, Annalee is going to read just a small sampling from the Terraformers.
I'm just going to read you a few little bits from the opening chapter of the book, which is called Pleistocene Fetishist. And it begins with an epigram from the Environmental Rescue Team Handbook, which is, "When in doubt, don't kill anyone." Destry could smell the smoke long before she saw its improbable source. There was some kind of person, possibly Homo sapiens, tending a fire at the edge of the boreal forest. She squinted, trying to make out details from half a click away. The person's skin was so pale she guessed it had hardly met real sunlight, which meant they were definitely not a stray worker from one of the construction camps. When the intruder crouched next to the flames, she caught a glimpse of red beard merging into a tangle of hair. In their hands, a hare was speared and cooking on an expensive alloy spit. The sight was horrifying, and Destry flinched back reflexively. "Let's stop," she whispered to her mount, a thick-barreled moose with red-brown fur and a crown of antlers spreading from his forehead like a pair of massive cupped hands. He flicked an ear in acknowledgement as she slid off his back and into his long shadow. Sinking down on one knee, Destry pressed her bare fingers into the soil, spreading them wide, establishing a high-bandwidth connection with the local ecosystem. Thousands of sensors welcomed her into the planet's network, their collective perceptions knitting together from shards of cached memory, fragments of recorded sensation and perception. In this state, she too was a sensor, processing data through her eyes, nose, tongue, skin, and ears. What she perceived, she shared with the ecosystem. She could feel the sensors collaboratively reviewing the scene from her perspective, learning that she wanted to know more about the mammal at the edge of the forest. It was like her body had become the land. Her awareness stretched forward, racing through root systems and over insects, tasting acid levels in the soil. The person's feet on the ground registered as pressure on her back, and she smelled redox reactions in the fire. Each sensor's evaluation joined the swelling chorus in her ears as the tiny machines voted on what their data points might mean. Polymer, hair, carnivore, unprocessed excrement, dead trees, carbon cycle perturbation, predator, metal, fur, synthetic microbiome. As Destry's data surged across the field and into the forest, the sensors could see what she did, and their analysis coalesced into a strong probability. Homo sapiens in the region for 8 days, causally linked to tree loss, small mammal loss, excrement buildup, complex toxins. But there was no data emanating from the person, save for a persistent encrypted stream aimed at an orbital satellite. Disconnecting from the ecosystem, Destry unfolded her muscular frame and ambled into talking range with the intruder. "Hey, stranger," she called after a few minutes. "I'm ERT Ranger Destry Thomas. Do you know you're on unoccupied land?" The person looked up, their flat, blank face twitching into an awkward grin. Definitely Homo sapiens. They stood, technical jumper gleaming a dull gray in the afternoon sun. Now that she was closer, Destry could see a small cabin tucked into the trees next to a collapsible trellis where a few pelts were stretched. Mink, hare, beaver. A flicker of outrage licked the inside of her ribs, but she kept it in check. No point in getting flustered. "Who are you? What are you doing on this land?" The person's mouth worked as if they hadn't spoken for a while. Good evening, ERT Ranger Destry Thomas. Don't think I've ever seen environmental rescue on a private planet." Destry ignored his comment and ran her hands through the waist-high grass, connecting to the sensors that dusted each blade. Whatever was happening inside this person's encrypted stream, it was getting thicker. Data poured down furiously and shot back up again. She stopped a few meters away from the fire. "What's your name, stranger?" One hand was free. The other settled lightly on her holstered gun, slung low over her right hip. "Name's Charter. I'm not looking for trouble, Ranger. I'm here to experience the Pleistocene. It's the purest environment for mankind." She groaned to herself. Charter was the default male name for Homo sapiens remotes. No wonder he was regurgitating that fat data stream. Somebody was controlling him from off-world, probably thousands of light years away, using this proxy body to get their jollies in the ecosystem she'd sworn to protect. "All right, Charter. I'm not sure who you are or how you got here, but this is unoccupied land. It's not your habitat. Verdance is going to start selling it pretty soon. No harm done." Charter was starting to sound whiny, hinting at the personality of whoever controlled him. You need to biodegrade everything in this camp and get off this land right now. Charter yanked some flesh off the hair and put it between his teeth, chewing awkwardly. You know that a man evolved to eat meat, don't you? It would have been hilarious to hear a completely fabricated Homo sapiens remote taunting her like that if it hadn't been so nauseating to watch. She tried again in her calmest voice. Listen, this isn't a debate. You need to get off this land. No can do, Ranger Destry Thomas. Best be on your way. My compliments to you on the well-stocked forest, though. This meal is just like the ones our ancestors ate during Earth's Pleistocene. The remote stretched his lips in a badly executed attempt at a smile. Here on the savannas, where our species was born, I can experience evolution firsthand. The only thing that would make it more authentic would be some nice moose jerky. The anger rising through her chest finally found her tongue. This is not a savanna, you pus licker. It's boreal forest. With one fluid motion, she slipped her gun from its holster, spun it up, and shot the remote between the eyes. Okay, sorry, I'm just finding my spot. So he dies. Destry signaled to Whistle, and he trotted through prairie grass to the still smoking fire. We're going to be here for a while, she said. Whistle couldn't reply to her. His mouth was built to a perfect Pleistocene moose template, but he could text. The cinder in his brain reached out to network with hers, skipping across the radio spectrum, looking for a way to be heard. When he found it, he typed, "Looks bad, Destry." The moose had a limited vocabulary, but it got the job done. He was right. She'd turned a shit situation into a slurry of blood-flecked diarrhea. Stretching up a hand, she rubbed the warm, furry hide of his neck. You can graze if you want. You want to have lots of energy for the trip back.
It's very important that you got to the texting moose, the texting flying moose. No spoilers. It happens in the next paragraph.
Yeah, exactly.
The texting flying moose, because that at least hints at the sort of kaleidoscope that is to come. If we just stopped at the kind of gun-slinging ranger, we might think that this is a conventional science fiction novel. So I want to talk about this maximalism, and all of you are going to experience this as you dig into this book. I was reflecting as I read it and then afterwards on sort of the world building of abundance versus perhaps like the world building of order and structure. I think this is because I have been rereading Tolkien lately, and for as capacious and impressive as his myth making is, it's actually very spare, and it's certainly very kind of orderly and stringent with that sort of stringency of syntax. The Terraformers to me is maximalist. So I guess my question to start is, are you tracing out a new genre here? Why is this novel so big?
It's actually not that long.
But it's wide.
It is wide. It takes place over 1,600 years. So we meet Destry and Whistle the moose, and Whistle does fly. It's really awesome. I wrote this during the pandemic, so I was like, what do I need to make myself feel better? Mm-hmm. I need to ride on a flying moose for like an entire book. Mm-hmm. And so we get to see how Destry is dealing with this phase in the terraforming of this planet, where it's still extremely undeveloped. And then in the next sections, we skip ahead 600 years and then another 600 or 700 years. And so we see what the planet is like when the first cities are being built, and then in the final section, what it's like when the cities are fully built and they're dealing with gentrification. So the final section is called the Gentrifiers, and you will definitely recognize our fair city in this book. There are a couple of cities in the book that are clearly, you can see that I've taken little pieces of San Francisco and put them in there. And I think that as for the scope, I feel like when you say maximalist, you're sort of saying like, why is it so covering so much time?
Time, but also sort of morphology, right? Because again, these are cities that are inhabited not only by Homo sapiens, not only by these sort of alternate Homo archaea and Homo sort of, very diverse humans, but really by every configuration of limbs, wings, rotors, brains,
Yep.
metallic carapaces. I mean, there's a very Annalee Newitz thing, but still, you've pushed it here. You pushed it here into new territory.
Yes.
And so maybe a sharper question is, was this kind of just natural for you following that those interests and those curiosities, or was there a sense for you of saying, I'm going to challenge myself to to map it all out?
Yeah.
And put this all on the page.
I definitely. So it was funny that that we were like referencing Scooby-Doo earlier, because I think that part of my inspiration for this was things that I read as a kid that had a lot of characters that weren't human. So I was a huge Beatrix Potter fan when I was a kid. I was like obsessed with Beatrix Potter, particularly the character of Hunca Munca, who's like this mouse who gets like really pissed off that like the dollhouse has like way more stuff than she has. Like these humans have built a dollhouse and they're like, oh, our little inanimate dolls get to have like blankets and plates. And Hunca Munca's like, well, fuck that. I'm a mouse. I'm a living mouse. And she goes in and she steals all the plates and she like messes up the house. And like by the end, she has to say sorry and stuff, but I kind of forgot about all that. I just like the part where Hunca Munca, the mouse, had like a revolution and like stole all the middle class stuff. So I was thinking about how, one of our big problems as a species dealing with climate change and dealing with the way that we're impacting the environment is that we have this habit of thinking of sort of human exceptionalism, Homo sapiens exceptionalism. Like we're like every other creature is just like some species out there, but like we're special. We're not the same as like a mouse or a worm or a moose. And we take that same attitude toward the environment as a whole. It's like it's us and them, like Homo sapiens against all other life forms. And so I really wanted to think about, how would you tell a story about human beings who see themselves as part of the ecosystem?
Right.
So, and part of the way you do that is have the ecosystem talk back.
Right.
And have the ecosystem come to the table and say, like, cut it out. Or have a character who can actually physically connect to the ecosystem and hear the ecosystem saying, like, there's a buildup of excrement here. And, like, instead of being able to ignore that or, like, be like, oh, whatever, we just dumped a bunch of poop in the bay. Like, I can't smell it or see it. But, like, what if we could all connect to the bay right now? And the bay was like, too much poop! Yeah, I was just listening to the Bay podcast where they were talking about like how much poop got dumped in the Bay over the past few weeks.
Right. In the absence of direct links, we rely on podcast intermediaries.
Yeah.
But you posit there's a foundational event in your book, and again, not a spoiler because I think you learn about it in the first 20 pages, if that. The Great Bargain, which really is the beginning of this history. I mean, and I think you call it the end of the Anthropocene, which is lovely. You sort of say, cap it. Nope, we're done with that.
Yeah,
Not doing anything.
Anthropocene is over.
Maybe you could just briefly, quickly characterize that event in your, altering your future timeline. And then I'm actually really curious to know, because it is so stirring. We come back to it again and again. I'm curious to know if this event that you'll describe is something that kind of you invented as you were concocting this world, or if maybe it actually is part of the foundation of why you wanted to like write this novel in the first place.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the Environmental Rescue Team, which is the group that Destry's part of and a lot of the other characters in this book, they're a very ancient order for this world. I mean, they're far in our future, but they're far in the past for folks in this time period. And it's a group of people who are like first responders and environmental engineers. They are there's a way in which they're a bit monastic, but their spirituality it's not like our kind of spirituality. It's much more about shepherding ecosystems and shepherding the people in them. So their job isn't just taking care of trees, which is a big part of it. They love trees, of course, and moose, but also like if there's a human-caused disaster, they rescue the people. And later in the book, we see that they rescue people from a political disaster too. It's not just like if a mountain falls on you, it's like also if a dictator falls on you, they will help out. So they have this ethos of serving the public. And early in their history, when they were on Earth, back in the mists of basically legend, because none of these characters have access to what really happened. And we meet historians who are like, oh, we have historical records, but it turns out that they're actually just plays that were put on thousands of years later.
Great.
And like they're just, so.
Love it.
So there was this moment where after climate change has really ravaged the planet, a bunch of environmental activists in what we think of as Canada have kind of the future version of the Green Revolution, and they call it the farm revolutions. And it's the moment at which they decide we cannot continue to live on the earth without asking other non-human animals what they think about what we're doing. And they have hand-wavy synthetic biology technologies, and they start building non-human animals like cows and moose and other kinds of creatures who can text from their brains to Homo sapiens brains. And they enter what they call the great bargain with these non-human animals. And the bargain is, we're going to respect you. We're going to bring you to the table and ask you how we should be doing farming, how we should be living on the land. And in return, we will respect your wishes as much as we can. And so there's this phase in Earth's history after the Anthropocene ends where this great bargain takes hold, and humans and non-human animals are like working side by side to kind of rebuild this ravaged planet. And we only hear about this in like bits and pieces throughout the book because it is kind of their deep backstory. And we do meet this like annoying video game designer who's trying to create a really realistic representation of the farm revolutions, which everyone finds super boring because it's just like a bunch of people sitting around having conversations about like land management and stuff. And they're like, but wait, I thought there was a big battle with dragons. And he's like, that is not historically accurate. So they were sad about that. Turns out accurate history doesn't make a great video game.
Yeah. And so this great bargain, is this something that was kind of bouncing around in your head for a long time, a medium time? Did it emerge after you had already landed on the planet of Saskia? Because it really is, I mean, so stirring, and the way it kind of invites the talking animal genre or trope into service of like some very stirring and very kind of political ends. It's fabulous.
It's funny that you asked that because it did come to me in the writing.
It did.
Like it wasn't, there's certain things in the book that, I don't know if this is how you write, but like I have certain scenes that I want to get to. Like when I start a book, I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to have, this isn't really a spoiler because there's a major part of this book about volcanoes. And I was like, okay, there's definitely going to be a volcano war. And I was like, I know that's going to happen somehow. So I knew that was going to happen. I knew there was going to be, in the third section of the book, I knew that there would be a sentient flying train who fell in love with a cat, because we all need to know where the cat bus came from in My Neighbor Totoro. Mm-hmm. So I knew that was going to have to happen. And yeah, I've always wondered where that cat bus came from. But I didn't know about the Great Bargain. And it was funny because I was trying to think about what are alternate ways of portraying our Homo sapiens relationship with nature, because we often talk about like the dualism, like man and nature, and I was like, but no, we're getting away from duality in this book, and the word bargain kept coming up for me.
Yeah. It does. You gestured literally at the hand wavy synthetic biology. There's and in this I find I detect a link to Autonomous, and maybe I don't know, maybe actually this is the Annalee Newitz extended universe.
Oh no,
maybe
this is a sequel.
Okay, so they literally take place in the same sort of continuous universe, and that we see the maturation of these technologies. Awesome. I will say that, and so as you'll discover when you read the book, in the far future, in the fruition of these technologies, I mean, it is wide open. People can make and remake their bodies and make new ones, and people are kind of born by being designed and 3D printed. And I mean, it's cool. And of course, it's done with incredible humanity and tenderness. But it's also, I mean, it's really radical. And I'm wondering, as you consider this plasticity, this like absolutely radical, the potential of the plasticity for life that you began in Autonomous, that we kind of see in its full fruition here, Well, first of all, I mean, I know you're not a forecaster, but I mean, do you think that's coming for humans on this planet at some point? And how do you feel about it? You know, not only as a writer who can put it to use on the page, but like, do the opportunities that characters have in this novel, does it seem exciting to you? Does it seem disorienting? All of the above?
So let me answer the first question first, which is, could this really happen? So there's sort of two pieces to that. One is that, yeah, I think at some point we will get our heads out of our asses and be like, yes, of course, whales and dolphins and elephants and a lot of other non-human animals have language, and we just need to stop pretending like they don't. I love when scientists are like, oh, you know, these whales all have unique sounds assigned to each other. Is it a name? I couldn't possibly say. And it's like, well,
Great.
I mean, it sounds like a name. I don't know. Like, and there's a lot of, I mean, we know there's a lot of non-human animals, even the ones that we have in our lives, where it's like, you're communicating with them. They're not communicating exactly the same way we do, but in some cases they are, you know, like you step on a cat's foot and it's going to tell you, you know, same way a person would. So, I'm sorry, I just stepped on my cat's foot and he was pretty, he's fine. He's totally fine. It was not bad. He was just like really annoyed. So I think that we will become more comfortable. Hopefully some of us will become more comfortable with the idea that humans are not uniquely fancy and intelligent and whatever. And maybe we'll stop fetishizing the idea of intelligence itself and realize that you can't measure it. It's not a thing, you know, it's just something that somebody in Silicon Valley made up and commodified and called it an AI. And then they were like, oh, well, we have to have intelligence if we're going to commodify it. So that's like a sort of a sidebar rant. But then the other thing is that I think a big part of this book is I said initially that it's kind of growing out of things like Beatrix Potter, where it's allegorical. And so part of what I'm suggesting is it's not so much that we are actually going to sit down at a table with a naked mole rat and have the naked mole rat like explain to us why human beings have done some bad things, but that we will extend to other life forms the same kind of the same kinds of perhaps rights or dignity that we assign to other people. But that's a long way off, right?
Yeah.
I mean, first we have to start assigning dignity to each other. And then I think as that happens, I think as we start acknowledging each other's humanity more and more, that we can start to see, oh, this distinction between us and other non-human animals is really kind of fake.
Yeah. It is a long way off. Reading the book, which of course it's this fabulous sort of brain-tingling 50,000, 60,000 years in the future. But I did get the sense of like, I wonder, maybe Annalee auditioned like 7,000 years and was like, no, not gonna happen.
It has
not
to
gonna
be
happen.
really far.
Yeah. And then and for me, of course, I was thrilling from the moment that I don't know if it was in a blurb I read or maybe when I just opened up and saw the date. It just is an electric thrill to see those kind of dates. I don't know if there's any other science fiction readers in the room who have the same feeling that I do, which is that I truly love the near future, you know, gleaming cyberpunk or post-cyberpunk or post-cyberpunk stories. They're great, but they're also easy. Certainly at this point, they're very easy. And what truly impresses me as a reader and also now as a writer is the heavy lift of the 10,000 years, 30,000 years, 60,000 years. But I mean, in some ways, I want to know how it's done, how it's accomplished, and maybe more pointedly, it seems to me the challenge, and you can tell me if I'm framing this wrong. It seems to me the challenge is that as you push forward into the future, the cone of possibility, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because, you know, the compounding events and all the things that could happen. And by the time you get to 60,000 years from now, anything could have happened. So how do you choose what happened? Like, how do you make sense of that just kind of limitless blob of future possibility? It's exciting, but it also seems, certainly as a writer, it's actually quite like daunting and scary.
Well, I mean, part of the way you do it is by focusing on something small, right? So in this future, obviously there's a bunch of different things happening on all kinds of planets. We almost never hear about it. This is really, it's funny because this is a a novel that depends on space travel, but it's all set on a planet. Like we never leave the planet. In fact, the characters aren't even allowed to leave the planet because they're owned by the company that's terraforming it. And if they left, they would be like runaway workers. And we assume that they would be murdered. And so so part of it is keeping it small. And part of it was like, whenever I'm writing futures, I always think about history, and I think about, okay, what were humans doing 60,000 years ago? And like, what would that difference be like? And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that 60,000 years ago, humans were building reed boats and crossing oceans, crossing from Southeast Asia to Australia, for example. So we know that humans were already exploring. We know for sure that humans already had like really fancy toolkits. There was just this amazing discovery that's been in a lot of scientific journals, but also in the mainstream media, about this workshop for obsidian tools that's 1.2 million years old that was discovered in Ethiopia. And so people had workshops where they were like trying out different kinds of super fancy obsidian tools 1.2 million years ago. So we've been remaking our environment, making tools out of it for a really long time.
Incredible.
And I feel like for us right now, like we're at that reed boat stage in our space exploration. Like I feel like those people who were in the reed boats were like, frick, I found Australia. Like that's us like finding the moon, basically, or like dreaming of Mars, you know? And that in 60,000 years, maybe we would have developed kind of to where we are now. And so I was like, yeah, it's going to be different, but we're also not so different. We're still going to be struggling with like some basic questions about like, how do you allocate resources? What does it mean to have property? If you want to move to a new planet, who pays for it? Do you have to pay for it? Like maybe there's some systems where you don't, but in this story you do, because you have interstellar real estate developers. And people are different. People are now moose and cats and all different things, but the moose, they still have a bad romance. Like there's there's a moose romance that's a little rocky.
Maximalist.
But I mean, moose, they're so cute. Don't you want them to get together?
The moose as the icon. Truly, the moose as the icon of the. I mean, what is a more maximalist animal than the moose with its huge horns? I have the thing about humans being the same, or some things staying the same. I do have a somewhat pointed follow-up question on the point of sort of the far future. In this novel, in 60,000 years hence, there is still coffee, and so my question is there always coffee? Does it not matter how many millennia pass? Will there always be coffee?
There's coffee. There's also dumplings.
There's dumplings. Yeah.
So
Noted.
It's like we know like some of the oldest like food that we've found, like sort of food from like antiquity, are dumplings. Like on the Silk Road that kind of connected China with the West. They found desiccated dumplings on there that are like 2,000 years old. So I'm like, yeah. I think dumplings and coffee. Yeah,
it's comforting.
That's
part
of the utopian.
In a world, it is. Yeah, there's
a lot of spicy food. They use a lot of garlic and peppers and
There's utopias and dystopias, kind of all braided together in this book. But the presence of a few comfort foods kind of anchors you as sentient trains go whizzing through the air.
Exactly.
Okay, so begin to formulate your questions if you have them, and of course, if we'll just see what people want to ask, and I have a little mini conclusion at the end. But to launch us with at orbital escape velocity into your questions, I do have a flash round.
Okay, I'm ready.
The rules are simple but strict.
Okay.
You will be offered two choices, just a list of sort of binary choices here. No clarifying questions are permitted, and you must choose one.
Okay, so we're already stuck in binarism.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
There are some branching. There's some branching. There's a few sort of branches here. So
awesome.
we have a
little
subtlety.
Okay.
Garden or wilderness?
I'm already like, I want a wilderness garden. I guess. I can't decide.
We'll call that one the warm up. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Near future or far future?
Far future.
Follow up. Far future or like far future?
Super far.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
Founding a city or walking away from a city?
Founding a city.
Train or spaceship?
Train.
Biofilm or mycorrhizal network?
Biofilm.
A moose that never texts you back or a moose that texts you constantly and it's always TikTok videos?
I'm gonna say moose TikTok videos. I would love moose TikTok.
Yeah, and you want to see what's on their feed, right? Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
I want to know what they're thinking
on their
about.
For Moose
Like,
feed.
I mean, I've been watching moose TikTok. Have you guys seen the moose TikTok that's going around where the moose shakes its head and both its antlers fell off? Somebody caught it on like a ring cam or something. It was like a moose right outside their house, and it does this great full body shake and then shakes its head and poof. It's really great. Just look it up. Moose shakes its antlers
Annalee
off.
might already have a moose texting companion.
I think I might. I have a lot of moose
yeah.
in my feed.
Crow or robot?
Oh, man. Robot crow.
Imagination or infrastructure?
But those aren't
Yes, it's the
Okay,
cruel, unyielding
infrastructure,
rules of the game.
infrastructure.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. But this is the last one. This is the last one, and this is the most. I mean, this is just. It's
just cruel.
It's a cruel iron vice for Annalee Newitz. The final choice ultimately is fiction or nonfiction.
I refuse.
Annalee characteristically pulls a Kobayashi Maru and refuses to play the game. Okay, so we have time for a few questions. If just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll spot you if you have any.
This mic also can go around.
Yeah, wonderful, perfect.
Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Put it around your back. Oh, sorry. Good. Thank you. Sorry.
Erica had a
raise your hand if you have a question.
Erica did.
In the yellow.
Yes.
Sorry, this might be. It's not about the book directly, so it might be annoying. Feel free to answer it however you want.
Okay.
But when
As
you're
long as I don't have to choose between like imagination and infrastructure,
No.
I'm like totally fine.
no, and just talking about like the far past and the far future, and you might actually know this, or you might be speculating. Anything's fine. We've been humaning around and communicating for a long time. Why did we invent what we see as writing so recently? This is like a real question I just thought of. So
Yeah, it is a super interesting question, and of course, people have really different ways of defining writing. So that's part of it. And actually, there's been a lot of talk recently in the archaeology/anthropology community because there's a lot of really ancient cave drawings. Again, you may have seen this in your science news feed. There's a lot of ancient cave drawings that have patterns of dots in them. And there's a new hypothesis that those dots, which are really circles, might represent phases of the moon. And so it may be that ancient people like, 10, 20, 30,000 years ago, more than that, were tracking the moon. So is that writing? Like, I don't know. We've had paintings in caves that are very abstract and like handprints in caves that go back 50,000 years. It's like maybe those handprints meant something to people, I mean, I think leaving behind some kind of symbolic image that people can read later, that to me counts as writing. I've always been really pissed off by this idea that like, oh, well, Europeans and Asians had writing, but like the people of the Americas, they didn't really have writing. They had like quipu and they had, images that were like tied in knots into belts and things like that, but that doesn't count as writing. It's like, shut up. That's writing. That's writing. Like, I don't understand. I mean, it all comes back to this kind of like Western exceptionalism of like, well, our kind of writing, like cuneiform is the right kind of beginning to writing, and then it continues apace. And then it becomes the Roman alphabet, and that's how you do writing. So I think the question about why we invented it, though, everybody, has a different idea. Like, is it for cosmology? Is it to record history? Is it to do taxes? Who knows? We wanted to leave our mark, I guess, right? But yeah, we're never going to know unless you invent a time machine in which case, let me know.
Not happening. Thank you.
Yeah, that was an awesome question. I love thinking about
Hi. I'm curious where you would say Terraformers sits on the utopian to dystopian spectrum
This
and
layer.
and why?
Yeah, it's funny because I think all of my fiction is topian. Like I try to have it be.
No, utopia or dystopia, one word.
I know I'm bad. It's dialectical, man. It's because I want to show realistic barriers to achieving a better community or a better relationship with each other, right? So I've never written anything that I thought was purely utopian or dystopian, but the funny thing is, like, my novel Autonomous, which is kind of a more near future-y book, which is very cyberpunk, people were like, oh, it's dystopian, because it has this cyberpunk aesthetic to it, and people think of cyberpunk as dystopian, but it actually has kind of a happy ending, and, like, the robot gets laid, which they really want to do, and, like, a lot of characters wind up okay. And, like, in this novel, everyone keeps saying it's so utopian because it's got these beautiful images of nature and it's got cute moose and, like, cute other creatures. But, like, a lot of bad things happen. I will say that it also has kind of a happy ending. Like, none of the good guys are, nobody gets Joss Whedoned. Like, there's no, like, let's kill your favorite character. I don't do that. I've never done that. But, like, it's full of struggle. So it's like, it's more, I would say that this book is much more maybe kind-hearted than some of my other stuff. Like, there's a lot of characters who are very just sweet people. But there's also characters who are kind of fucked up. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a little bit closer to utopia than dystopia, but, it's realistic in some ways, so bad things happen.
Just a quick follow-up. I guess it's interesting. I feel like utopian novels can have evil characters and bad things that happen, but it's like, is this a society that I would want to live in? Like, that feels like a better overall society than we have now. Or is it a society that I don't want to live in and hope my children would never have to live in, and so on?
So in this novel, there are, of course, a variety of different kinds of governance. It's a big planet. So there's parts of the planet that fucking are horrible and that you will recognize from our planet. And then there's a city called Spider City where they're really trying to do something different. And they have a really interesting form of democracy, which I thought a lot about. And I don't know if it would really work, but it feels really good. And it's all about how do you honor the minority in a group? Like, when you have a majority decision, how do you make sure that the minority also gets a concession? Everything's based on bargaining. And not capitalist bargaining, but like real legitimate bargaining where people come to the table and they're represented equally. So I really love them. Like, I love the people of Spider City, and Spider City is like a major part of the book, and they live under this awesome volcano. So they're kind of like super badass and they have incredible engineering, but they're also just, I don't know, they just are really nice. And yeah, so I think I'd rather live there than here. Although, some nice parts of San Francisco, I like living here too. So,
thank you.
It's just a question about writing process. So when you're writing a book like this, your reading diet, do you gravitate towards books you think you can learn from that are similar? Do you avoid them to not be do you read Kim Stanley Robinson and Asimov and Le Guin and all of those folks, or do you say, no, I'm doing my own thing?
I don't really read very much Asimov anyway, so that wouldn't have changed too much. I thought iRobot was really fun. It's a really good question. I tend to read stuff that, I think I do both. Like, I think I read stuff opportunistically, like if a book comes along. Like, I actually read a lot of fantasy while I was writing this. And I think it makes sense because when you set something that far in the future, it almost becomes a fantasy secondary world. But I also was reading a lot of books like about animal consciousness, and like I love reading books about talking animals. So I'm never going to stop doing that. So I definitely was doing that as well. So I don't have that thing that some writers have of like, my mind will be polluted if I read people who are similar. Like I like kind of being in touch with what other people are doing in the same area.
Could you pass this over?
I've always enjoyed how your fiction books incorporate so many elements of your science reporting and nonfiction work as well. You've teased a little bit of that, of what we'll see in Terraformers. Can you talk a little bit more about the science obsessions that we see here? Are we going to see elements of Lost Cities show up in this book?
For sure. There are definitely, as I was working on Lost Cities, one of the things that I came away with was a feeling of like, ooh, if I could make my own city, like what would it be like? So there are some cities in this book that are based on actual cities that archaeologists have found. But they're mixed together with other stuff. So you won't be able to like look at a city and be like, this is definitely Cahokia or something like that. But there is like an evil city with a ziggurat, for example, because I don't know why I don't have anything against ziggurats, but like this particular ziggurat is quite evil, and poorly made, because in my world, like things are evil when they're just shoddily made and they don't serve their purpose. But I did a ton of reporting to actually put this book together, and I talked to a number of geologists, planetary scientists about how you would build a planet from scratch. I spent a really long time talking to this one scientist who studies early atmosphere on Earth, and I was like, okay, what I need to know is, I'm sure it drives people crazy when science fiction writers ask them these questions, but I was like, I need them to be able to build an atmosphere as fast as possible. Like, what's the absolute fastest you could build an atmosphere? And I finally like winnowed it down to 10,000 years. He was like, that you could do, like if you had the hand wavy technologies and you could jumpstart the carbon cycle, realistically you could do it in 10,000 years. So I was like, great. This interstellar real estate development company has a time horizon of 10,000 years that they're doing. And they have to figure out on their return on investment for that. Imagine that. But I also talked to our head of the Department of Transit here in San Francisco, Jeffrey Tumlin, and asked him about trains, because there's a train character. So I got to have that conversation about what would it be like if a train had consciousness. And he thought about it so much. I was so happy. He was like, oh my God, I've been like really wanting to tell the answer to this question. So he was like, so he knew that the train would be obsessed with strategy games, because of course trains are constantly optimizing their route. And he really also thought that the train, and I didn't put this in, but he really felt that trains would be like dogs who really want to be pleasing you. And if they do something wrong, they piddle, which I don't have dogs. So I was like, I kind of know what you mean. I have cats, so cats will just like piss on your bed for fun or to like mess with you. And he was like, yeah, if the train like did something wrong, they would have to have some way of piddling. And I'm like, I'm not going to put that in the book, but I'm glad that he'd like thought about that. Like every time I ride Muni, I'm like, is this train piddling? So it was truly like a huge pleasure to like get to do all that kind of asking really weird questions of scientists, and generally they were game to answer, so it was good.
Do we have any more questions?
I'm just so curious about your writing process, like on a given day, and I'm hearing all the reporting you did. At what point were you like, okay, I'm ready to write this book? And what did your day look like then once you were actually doing the writing?
So I was kind of doing reporting as I went along. So I definitely before I started writing, I did have to have those questions about like, how do you build a planet? Because I was afraid that I would start building the planet and then it would be all wrong. So I knew, like I said, it would be kind of piece by piece. So like once I had in my head, this is what the planet is going to be like. This is how it wound up without atmosphere, which you actually never find out in the book. Why did the planet not have atmosphere? Sorry. But it was hit by another planetary body that kind of knocked off most of its atmosphere. But we never see that happen. That's off stage. And then I could start writing. And then as things would come up, like, so there's a huge river in the book that it plays a major part in the plot. This big river that goes all the way down the center of the mega continent. And so I knew I had to talk to a river expert before I got into the river too much. And the thing that was great is I called him up and I was talking to this awesome guy, Kyle House, who studies the Colorado River. And I was like, tell me about dams. And he gave me this super cool idea. I'm not going to give you the spoiler, but like he totally was like, did you know that this could happen in rivers? And I was like, fuck. Anyway, it's really awesome. So anyway, that was great because then I knew
in the book?
For sure. It's in the book.
Oh,
You'll
cool.
see what happens. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's a really intense scene. So like that was the glory of it, was like I would talk to people and then they would tell me stuff and I would be like, oh, now I can actually figure out the plot because they've actually told me a factual thing that'll be amazing. So generally I try to write a little bit every day, but that doesn't always happen. So my practice is write as much as I can when I can, do as much research as I can when I can. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So this is a kind of a similar follow-up, but it seems awesome to be able to ask all these people questions about the trades and the rivers and atmosphere. And it sounds fun, and it also gives you ideas. And I wonder, it also in writing a book like this, I imagine can get really down the rabbit hole of like, but how does this work? How does this work? How does this work? But also you're writing about something 60,000 years in the future where you can plug into the ecosystem and you have hand-wavy technology and all these pieces. So I guess there's a question of how do you decide when something needs to be based in scientific fact of now, or even what you think would be extrapolated versus what can be fantasy or built into a future. And why would we say 10,000 years now for atmosphere, but like in 60,000 years you would imagine you could do it in a day, with new technology. So I wonder how you make that distinction, especially for any writers who are thinking, oh my gosh, where do I stop the rabbit hole of needing to be perfect?
Yeah. And it really is a matter of making your choices, right? Because I really wanted this book to have realistic geology and realistic ecosystems. So I would go down a rabbit hole, and there's a scene in the book that probably takes half a page where characters are walking through this area that is it's a savanna / rainforest area, which actually does exist on Earth, but it's not that common. And I spent hours reading about what kinds of plants would they see here? What would it be like? Would it be muddy? Would it be acidic soil? What kind of geological features? And maybe that was me procrastinating. I'm not sure, but I really wanted to get that right. And then there were pieces of it, like I said, that because this was a book I was writing partly to deal with so much horror and loss because of the pandemic, I was just like, you know what? You want to have flying animals? Okay, Newitz, you got flying animals. We're just going to let you have that, okay? And so I just let myself have it. And I can't imagine how that technology would work, but sure, it's 60,000 years in the future. Maybe they've discovered whatever, anti-gravitons or some crap, right? And then I think the only other thing that felt to me super hand-wavy was the part about how would we actually engineer brains of non-human animals or humans? How would that work? Obviously, we don't have the technology for that now, but people are working really hard on it. So it's possible. But I think that the one thing that's truly silly is the flying. I just can't, it was just purely for fun. So, but it makes it a happy story. I think it's part of the utopian part of the writing somehow. I don't know why, but yeah.
So you put a lot in this book. Is there anything that, since you have us, you wish you could have put in the book, but you weren't able to, that you would like to share?
Well, so I already mentioned that all of the early terraforming of the planet takes place kind of off screen. So when we start, as you heard, because I read from the first chapter, the ecosystems are mostly built. They're still kind of building them up, but like the continents exist, the atmosphere is Earth-like. Most of the animals are mostly Pleistocene. They got a couple Devonian animals in there for fun. There's like several points where they kind of critique the realism of the Pleistocene planet. So I wish I could have had, like, I had originally planned to have like an opening section of the book where like the earliest terraformers are there, and they're like in like an orbital space station, and they're like bombarding the planet and creating the atmosphere. And you know, Kim Stanley Robinson has written some amazing scenes like that already, so like they're out there. And so I kind of wish we had that. And then I do wish that I could have had a little bit more of the final section of the book where the train and the cat are in love, like maybe just a little bit more of their romance. Like we do get their romance and we get to know them pretty well, but like could have maybe had a little bit more there. But you'll see, there's a lot of they get to have some adventures, so maybe I'll write some follow-up short stories.
Great. Last call for questions over here. Oops, sorry.
Just a question on like what it's like to sort of spend a lot of your time sort of thinking or almost kind of living in 60,000 years ahead, and like when you sort of come back to this time frame, does it make you like appreciate things, or things that you appreciate about where we are now, or things that really annoy you, or just like what's it like to live in that sphere that far ahead?
I mean, it's like, it's escapism, right? So it's just like when you spend a long day dealing with like the reality of some company screwing you over, but then in the evening you watch a Tolkien-based show, and you kind of go to another place for a while. It's like it's like getting to have a dream that you're conducting, which makes it actually kind of annoying because you don't get to just enjoy it. You have to be like, wait, does that make sense? Wait, no, I need to rewrite that. Oh, that sentence is ugly. Oh, you know, and so, but by the time it's over, you do still get that pleasure of escape. And sometimes like little things bleed through into real life. Like the characters in this book from the nice place, from the Utopian city, they all refer to each other as friend. And so they'll say like, hello, friend. And I've started saying that to my cat now. I always say to my cat, hello, friend. And I'm sure he's saying it back to me. I feed him chicken from the table, so I'm pretty sure he thinks I'm his friend. So yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, you started calling your cat friend, and also noticing that your cat has sort of been sneaking off to spend some time on a minibus. It's very, very suggestive. Guys, what's going on? Thank you all for coming on. Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Thanks so much.
I want to close just with kind of recalling a moment that it was such a signature moment for me. It was a little while ago now, and some of you actually may have heard this. The great Bay Area, one of our great forums, literally the show forum on KQED, has a newish host, Alexis Madrigal, and on his first show, kind of launching a new era of forum, to kick it off, they had a very wide-ranging discussion about the whole Bay Area, the future, how we should kind of think about living here and what's to come. They had 3 guests, just 3 people join them for that first show, and one of them was Annalee. And listening to it, it was so perfect and so appropriate to me that one of our 3 fates would be Annalee Newitz, one of the great minds and voices of this time and place. So please join me in thanking Annalee. And thank you.